40 centavos. Y nos vamos ya con la siguiente entrevista, con la última entrevista del día de hoy. Ya saludamos a Según Pelosky, founder of TPW Advisory, para hablar de ese impacto de los aranceles en la economía de Estados Unidos. Jay, welcome.
Thank you. Good evening.
Jay, it's difficult, I know it, but what are some of the intended economic benefits that proponents of tariffs often cite for the U.S. economy?
The benefits. That's an interesting question, given that most of the focus has been on, obviously, the negatives associated with tariffs. I mean, I think it's actually quite hard to come up with tangible economic benefits of tariffs, particularly if they're not kind of married with a well-thought-out strategic industrial policy plan. And that, sadly, is not the case here in the United States. At this point, as an investor, the benefit of tariffs is that everyone is so worried about them that I think the upside for investors is that President Trump is going to basically cave in on all the negotiations and take wins by basically going back to the status quo that existed prior to his famous Liberation Day. And because markets are so tilted and focused on the negatives around tariffs, that could be a positive surprise for risk assets.
How do tariffs typically affect the prices of imported goods for American consumers and business? Can you provide examples?
Example of where tariffs are inflationary? Basically, wherever they are put on in any kind of meaningful amount, so going beyond a couple of percent. Most developed economies have tariffs that are in the single digits, 2 or 3 or 4%, and so it's not really felt in the price environment or inflation environment. Today, even with the 90-day pause on reciprocal tariffs, the U.S. has about a 24% tariff on average across all imported goods. And so that is going to lead to price pressures as importers, most of whom don't have a margin of 25%, right? I mean, you think about it, like, what's the margin on sale of a certain product? Most companies don't have 25% margins. So they're going to have to increase the price of whatever it is they're importing to protect their margins. Otherwise, earnings and profitability will be affected. And so if you look at what Wall Street thinks earnings are going to be for the S&P 500 for 2025, they've reduced them fairly significantly, but they're still positive, which suggests that Wall Street at least expects most of the tariffs to be passed through to the consumer. And that's why you see the same banks having inflation estimates for 2025 of 4% or more, and that is the effect of tariffs.
Another question, what is the potential impact of tariffs on the competitiveness of U.S. export industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question, and that really goes to the heart of the issue with China and this idea of 140% or whatever the number is, tariffs on China. Most of what China exports to the United States are goods that are intermediate goods. In other words, they're not necessarily finished product, they're inputs into products that are finished and sold in the United States. And so that includes exports. And so that is obviously going to be problematic. The other problem with the tariffs on China is that most of those goods that China produces are not readily available elsewhere. So again, the importer is going to have to pay a very, very hefty tariff, which is why, as I say, I think ultimately we're going to go back to the status quo ante. Trump will declare victory, and that will be the end of it. But the thing to remember is that the U.S., for the most part, exports a lot of primary product, energy, agricultural products, etc. We're not really, at this point, a large industrial goods exporter. We do export at the high end of the industrial goods space, but those are, again, kind of like the Chinese exports to the U.S., are not very price sensitive because there are not many competitors. The most of what the U.S. sells abroad is services. That's where the U.S. has a huge advantage, which, interestingly enough, is not really talked about in the whole tariff discussion.
What is the role? What is the role of tariffs in shaping international trade relationship and agreement involving the USA?
That's a very good question. It seems as if the U.S. and the current administration, the Trump administration, really haven't thought this tariff process through very well, because we're kind of alienating our allies in Europe and, as well as importantly, in North America, right? The most sophisticated industrial supply chain in the world exists in North America between Canada, Mexico, and the United States. And yet the president decided to attack Canada and Mexico, and thereby creating uncertainty around that supply chain. At the same time, what we see happening is Europe integrating more aggressively to offset the risk of tariff and security pressures from the United States, as the U.S. under Trump pivots towards Russia. And at the same time, in Asia, we see the Chinese focusing on integrating the Asian region, with President Xi now traveling to Vietnam, Cambodia, and other countries. And so really the effect of this is to unify the two other regions of the world, Asia and Europe, against the United States, which itself is alienating its partners in North America, as opposed to deepening the integration with the Americas, both North and South, to create a better, more competitive, more integrated region in the Americas. So, as many have commented, it's actually quite hard to see the strategy that is being employed by the current U.S. administration, which is why the markets have reacted as they are, and why Europe and China are the two best performing equity markets year to date in dollar terms, massively outperforming the United States.
J. Pelosky, thank you for joining